Okay, we're looking at the ninth parak in the Talmud Devorah, and the ninth parak is concerned with the 10th sphira. How does one connect to what is called malchus, royalty? And royalty is identified with the Sechina itself. The Sechina is considered to be the ultimate, because again, what does the word Sechina mean? You see, people say, oh, Sechina means God. Okay, yeah, it's true. But Sechina comes from the word shachen, to dwell. So it is the aspect of God's divinity that is manifest and active in the world. That's the Sechina. So malchus and Sechina are synonymous. It is also called nukva. It is also called the feminine aspect because it receives all of the hashpa'ot. So in a sense, when we talk about connecting to malchus, emulating malchus, we are talking about connecting to the Sechina. Once again, we're just, and I include myself, we don't really have a deep and fundamental understanding of things. If somebody were to say, what does it mean to connect to the Sechina? So I would just say, it means being attached to Hashem. But you see, Sechina has a particular aspect of divinity, and Perek Tes is devoted to how you're dovak, how you're mistabek to Sechina, which is malchus. So the first thing was, and we looked at this yesterday, is you have to be humble, you have to be modest, you can have no pride in your accomplishments, your possessions, you have to feel that you're a poor, bereft person who is standing in the presence of the Creator, especially during davening. Now I had mentioned that there is another aspect of spiritual life, and that is to recognize your power, recognize your abilities, recognize your koach. That the Anochi Afor V'Efer, I am dust and ashes, has to be balanced with Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam. Because otherwise, if a person is overwhelmed with their meaninglessness, with their nothingness, with their insignificance, then the opposite. That can be an excuse not to do anything. Why should I learn? Why should I daven? Why should I do mitzvahs? I'm a nobody, right? If I'm a nobody, then whatever I do is not worth anything. So as I indicated, therefore, there is, even within the Talmud Devorah itself, I won't call it a contradiction, but an embracing of the double perspective. On one hand, this is not a touchy-feely, soft love book. In other words, this sefer does not talk about how much Hashem loves us. Although it's true, but that's not what the Mechaber is dealing with. On the other hand, in other words, this sefer is a lot about my lowliness, my worthlessness, the fact that without God I'm a nobody and I'm a nothing. But implicit, and I said this yesterday, I'm going to repeat it again, implicit in the whole message is my significance, my power, my greatness. Because what is this book about? By emulating Hashem's ways, you trigger Hashem emulating you. Which means, maybe this is an irreverent way of saying it, to some degree, and this is because it's Hashem's decision, of course. Hashem decided. We control Hashem. But again, I hasten to add, it was Hashem's decision that it be that way. So implicit in the notion that I'm a nothing, and therefore I have to emulate God, is I am also an everything, right? So in a sense, the double message of Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam and Anochi Afor V'Efer is actually built into the whole system there. Yeah.
For some reason along the way, kind of presented to me as something that's like experience, that when Hashem's goodness that we understand intellectually is absolute, is present, like we see it, we perceive His justice, everything is clear, like it's able to be made out, the kesher between how we're experiencing life and our knowledge that Hashem is perfect and good, that there's no gap between those things. Is that lacking in describing the Shekhinah?
Well, I mean, everything is lacking because we're never complete. But yeah, I think that's actually a very good way of understanding it, because the Shekhinah is the manifestation of a godliness that pre-existed the Shekhinah. But it's the particulars of the manifestation. And that's malchus, which is the conduit. The kingship of God is the conduit to which every other force is channeled and revealed. Right? So that's exactly why it's called malchus. So The connection of malchus and humility is once again based on the Zohar, that the sphere of malchus has no content other than being a conduit for all the other kochot that are channeled through it. And therefore a true melech, like David HaMelech, also feels, and he understands, that there is nothing other than Hashem that's being channeled through him. Okay, and we talked yesterday about the fact that a melech in particular, who has so much power, so much authority, has to clearly understand that he is just a channeler of divine energy. He is existing only to serve Hashem and to do good for Hashem's people, to be, as the expression goes, Eved li'avdei Hashem, a servant to those who serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In fact, I understand that phrase, which is really from the Rishonim, was taken over by some of the royal houses of Europe. They have a Latin thing, maybe even in England. I'm not sure. There's a Latin thing where I don't remember the Latin, but servant to the servants of God, or whatever it is, and that's taken from the Rishonim. Okay. Now, he then mentions an interesting exercise, which is designed to develop a person's humility. And the question is, how do we apply that? He says, it's a great thing for a person at a different stage in his life to go into voluntary Galus, go into exile, be an itinerant, like beggar almost, who wanders from place to place to place. People don't know you. People don't know who you are. You're just kind of wandering. You're not surrounded by your familiar comforts, by your familiar environments, by your friends. You're kind of a stranger. Now, apparently, the Ramak and other Mekubalim did this at various stages. But one thing I can say for sure, it was not a lifelong thing, because we know the Ramak lived in Tzfat and the Ramak had a chabur in Tzfat. So it wasn't something you make it as a project for your whole life. But for a period of time, there was a notion of Galus, and in fact, we have many, many stories about the Vilna Gaon, who was a great, great Mekubal, as besides being the guy in halacha that he was. The Vilna Gaon, in his 30s, in his younger years, went into exile. He wandered around anonymously. All sorts of stories about. In fact, they tell the story, I'm not sure if it's true, but you can research it, that apparently there is something in mathematics. The Vilna Gaon's family name was Kramer, Rav Elio Kramer. And there's something like the Kramer parallelogram or something Kramer and geometry. And the legend has it, you never really know, that the Vilna Gaon in his wanderings came across some mathematics scholars who had an insoluble mathematics problem. And the Vilna Gaon was able to solve it, and as a result there was something in geometry that is attributed to the Vilna Gaon. We do know, just as a general aside, that the Vilna Gaon was very interested and very skilled in geometry, and in fact, he commissioned, this is when he was older, he commissioned one of his Talmidim to translate Euclid's elements into Hebrew. It's called Al Mishulash, which is really a translation of Euclid into Hebrew, so that B'nai Torah could learn geometry. And geometry, of course, anyone that learns Sukkah understands that some, not necessarily the highest, most advanced, but some level of geometry is actually very helpful in the laws of Eruvin and in the laws of Sukkah. Right? So even Rav Chaim Kanievsky, people who never had any secular education, are very conversant with these types of mathematical ideas that appear in the Gemara. But these are different stories. But be as I'm just bringing it up because the Vilna Gaon himself wandered from place to place to place. This is called going into Galus. And there are two different reasons why one goes into Galus. And they're both connected to malchus, connecting to malchus. One idea is the notion of humility. Because you go to a place, nobody knows you. You don't have your normal comforts. You don't have any permanence in your life. You got to beg for food. You have to ask people for things. It keeps a person humble. It makes a person realize that maybe they're not as special as they would like to think that they are. It's a getter of humility. It breaks the heart. It breaks the arrogance. It breaks the gaiva. Of course, let me point out, just as an aside, the very important observation of the Mesilas Yesharim, the Ramchal, who says a person has to be careful not to be a bal gaiva about their humility. He says humility can also be a source of gaiva. I'm so proud how humble I am compared to all those other people who are so arrogant. The anava becomes the gaiva. Right? So obviously you got to be careful about that. But putting that aside, this breaks a person in a positive way. And there is a drasha that the Ramak brings. We say in davening, in Psukei Zimra, from Tehillim, Ashrei Shekel Yaakov Be'ezro. Do you remember this verse? Happy is the person that the God of Yaakov is in his help. Sivro al Hashem Elokav. Remember, I hope this sounds familiar. This is in Psukei Zimra. Now, Sivro means his hope is in God. Happy is the person that God is in his life and his only hope is in God. He does not depend on other people. So the Medrash says, the drush of Al Tikri, that since there are no vowels in Tanakh, so you could read a word in different ways. So Al Tikri, do not read it Sivro, his hope is in God, but read it Shivro, he is broken in his relationship to God, meaning humble. And the Ramak says it's Hatalia. The two readings are connected. When I'm humble and I realize I'm not in charge, then my hope is only in Hashem. You see, it's connected. So he says, Galus creates the shever. Galus creates the brokenness that allows you to feel the joy of being totally on God. This is a deep idea because it's the opposite of the associations that we normally have. We normally have the association that if I'm powerless, if I'm ineffectual, if I can't do things, that engenders depression, that engenders despair, that engenders paralysis. The Mukubalim are teaching another idea, that precisely when I recognize I'm not in charge, that lifts a great burden off my heart because I'm handing it over to Hashem. Now that doesn't relieve me of responsibility for Ishtadlus and everything else. We're not saying that. But in a sense, when I know I'm not in charge, that can lift a great burden from me. Like if I'm in charge of the world, that's kind of scary. So therefore, the notion of breaking your arrogance and realizing that your hope is in God, Shivro and Sivro, are connected. This is, by the way, an important rule generally. When you have an Al Tikri, don't read it this way, read it this way. It's not replacing the reading. It's suggesting that the ability to read it in multiple ways means each one is shedding light on the aspect of the other. That's a general rule in all Al Tikri this, Al Tikri this. So they tell a story about the Brisker Rav. Actually, I'll tell you two stories about the Brisker Rav. The Brisker Rav, by the Brisker Rav, I mean the last Rav of Brisk before the Holocaust. This is Rav Yitzchak Breitowitz, called Rav Velvel. He came to Eretz Yisrael as a widower with some of his sons after World War II, and he was considered to be, together with the Chazon Ish, they were considered to be the Gedolei Hador Mamish. The truth of the matter is, he's not the only Soloveitchik who was the Brisker Rav. His father was Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, and his grandfather was the Beis Halevi, all of whom were the Rav of Brisk. But whenever you see the Brisker Rav, we mean the last one, Rav Yitzchak Seif. Now, if you're a real old, I don't know if there's anyone alive that way, but let's say 50 years ago, if you were an old Yerushalmi and you said the Brisker Rav, you might have meant the pre-Soloveitchik Brisker Rav, Rav Yeshua Leib Diskin. But that, you have to be an old Yerushalmi to think about that. Today, when we say Brisker Rav, we always mean Rav Velvel, Rav Yitzchak Seif Soloveitchik. So Rav Yitzchak Seif Soloveitchik was in the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II, during part of the war. And if you read about the Warsaw Ghetto, you know what a hellish, devastating, horrific place it was. People were dying daily of starvation, disease, dead bodies piling up in the street. And that's besides the Nazi sporadic massacres and deportations. So there were the deportations, there were the sporadic shootings, and Nazi just felt they'd like to kill a few Jews at random. And then there was the starvation, and then there was disease, and then there was fear of not knowing what was going to happen the next day. Now the Brisker Rav, who had been from Brisk, the Brisker Rav had what you might call a nervous temperament in the sense of his Yiras Shamayim, that he was always very, very worried about mitzvahs. Did he say Kriya Shema right? Whatever. He was always second-guessing himself. Did I do this right? Did I do this right? In the Warsaw Ghetto, he seemed to have been unusually calm. He went about his business. He gave his shiurim, etc. He seemed calm. He seemed relaxed. He seemed serene. So someone had the chutzpah to ask him. Maybe it was a son. And it's a chutzpah question. He said, Rebbe, Tati, you're always so nervous. Now there's a reason to be nervous. Why are you so calm right now? How is it shaykh? So the Brisker Rav said the following idea. He said, when it comes to mitzvos, I am very nervous. Because mitzvos are my responsibility. Chazal say, Hakol b'dei shamayim, everything is in the hands of heaven, except for fearing God. So whether I do a mitzvah right is not up to Hashem. It's up to me. If it's up to me, he says, I am scared. I don't know if I did it right. I don't know if I had the right kavanah. I don't know if I missed a detail. Anything that depends on me, I get nervous about. But what if you're in a situation where there's absolutely nothing you can do about it? You're stuck. You could be killed any moment. You could be walking in the street and some Nazi guy just decides, and this is what happened. I'm not even talking about deportations. Just say, pull out a gun, just shoot a bullet through somebody's head. There was that randomness in the Holocaust too, not just the Masuderdika deportations. Starving, you don't know where your next meal is coming from. There's nothing you can do, no way to get out. You are trapped. So some people might go crazy. Some people might commit suicide. And by the way, the incidence of suicide in the Holocaust was very, very low. But logically, a person feels there's no way out. Kill myself. As the Germans did when they were called to trial. And as Hitler himself did. Right? They took what you might call the easy way out. But the Brisker Rav said, I feel the opposite way. When I'm confronted with a situation in which I have absolutely nothing I can do, I know it's totally on God. If it's totally on God, what am I nervous about? It'll be good. Now, let me point out, the Brisker Rav was not being Pollyannish. The Brisker Rav was not saying, I know everything's going to be a happy ending. The Brisker Rav lost his wife in the Holocaust. The Brisker Rav lost children in the Holocaust. He knew this tragedy. He was not sugarcoating and simply saying, no, everything's going to have a happy ending. In the sense of, a nice ending. But this is a much deeper idea. That, there may be tragedy. There may be suffering. There may be hardship. But I'm not scared. Hashem is directing this. And I know, even though I don't know what it is, there's a purpose, there's a reason. There's a good behind it. Therefore, the Brisker Rav said, precisely in my helplessness, I am relieved of the anxiety that I would have when I'm in charge. Because I'm not in charge. And this is what the Ramak is saying based on the Medrash. When the person is broken, I don't mean broken in terms of depressed, but when a person is humbled and knows without Hashem they can't do anything, then lahepech, instead of depressing them, it lifts them up. Because they know they're in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore there's meaning, there's purpose. There's some ultimate good that's going to be served. So part of the idea of Galus, going back to the Galus is a mechanism of inculcating humility within a person. We see the Vilna Gaon, the Ramak, the Arizal, they all had periods in their life of going into Galus. Back to Sitchin, I'll tell you, I don't want to forget my stories. I'll tell you another story about the Brisker Rav, which makes the same point in a different direction. And that is, eventually the Brisker Rav was smuggled, really miraculously, out of the Warsaw Ghetto. As you know, the Warsaw Ghetto itself was destroyed, and virtually every Jew in the Warsaw Ghetto, virtually, was killed, although there were very few survivors. But the Brisker Rav was smuggled out before the destruction of the ghetto. And I believe, I don't want to say for sure, I believe that he had to cut off his beard. He had to basically pretend that he was a Polish peasant, and he was being driven in a car, a smuggling operation. The goal was to get them into Switzerland. I don't know the motor routes. I don't know if Poland, Switzerland. I'm not sure. I have to look at a map of Europe. But basically, you're driving enough till you get into the famous Swiss neutrality. To this day, I don't really understand why a guy like Hitler respected Swiss neutrality. Somehow, Swiss neutrality is the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Like nobody, no matter who you are, you could be a Nazi. Nobody invades Switzerland. I'm not sure why, but even Hitler didn't dare touch Switzerland. So as soon as you got to Switzerland, you would be safe. So they're driving along, and they don't really. They have forged papers that say they're goyim or whatever it will be, but the papers are anyone any skilled person could see that these were forgeries. So they were really. It was very important they don't get stopped and be asked have their papers checked. So the Brisker Rav told some of his younger children. He quoted them from the Nefesh HaChaim of Chaim Volozhner that says, now this is interesting because the Nefesh HaChaim normally doesn't give you skulos, doesn't give you magical things. But there's one segula in the Nefesh HaChaim that if a person meditates on the pasuk, Atah Haresh Lodas, this is in the Sechina, you were shown, Ki Hashem Hu Elokim, God is the only God, Ein Od Milvado. Ein Od Milvado. There is nothing besides God. Ein Od Milvado. So Rav Chaim Volozhner says, and the Baal Shem Tov says the same thing. This does not just mean there is no other God. It means there is no other thing. Meaning there is no power that can affect you when you connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and you realize Hashem is the source of everything. So Rav Chaim Volozhner said, it is a great segula that when you're in danger, to think Ein Od Milvado, and that will protect you from all of the other forces, which as you realize that they are nothing, they become nothing. It's an interesting thing. They become something when you treat them as something. You treat them as nothing, they become nothing. Again, I can't say around the madrega that we could reach this level, but Rav Chaim Volozhner says there is such a madrega where if I consider this to be a nothing, it becomes a nothing. Ein Od Milvado. So the Brisker Rav told his children, who were very frightened, think of the pasuk Ein Od Milvado over and over and over again, and Emir Hashem will get to Switzerland safely. And miraculously, the car had to go through many, many different checkpoints in different countries and the like. And every time they waved them through. They just looked at the car. They looked like, Goyim, man, go ahead. Then, the last checkpoint, going into Switzerland, they were waved through. And all of a sudden, the guard said, let's just check the papers, which could have meant they could have been killed right then. So the Brisker Rav said to one of his sons, he says, did you stop thinking of the pasuk? And the child said, yes, I got distracted. I saw guards, I got scared. So the Brisker Rav says, go back and concentrate. And he went back, Einod Milvado, and the guard that was going to inspect, the other one said, listen, our shift is over, someone else is coming, I want to go home. Let him go. What's the difference? So Mamish, this Einod Milvado, got them through. Once again, it ties into the Brisker Rav's idea that when you put everything in Hashem and you know that you're not in charge, wonderful things can happen. Again, these are beautiful stories and very deep stories, and they teach us a lot. But once again, I can't say we're on the madrega where automatically these things are going to work for us. These are not magic spells. These are states of being, states of emunah, states of hergesh, regesh. And, if we're not there, we're not there. But it's something to realize the power of what it is to be in that particular state. Yeah.
With the concept of Inaugural Movado, does that go with the considered take on Simpson? Is that connected?
Yes, yes. As a matter of fact, it is. Although Rav Chaim Volozhiner uses it as well, but yes, Einod Milvado is one of the bases of the Hasidic understanding of Tzimtzum. Yeah, which gets people very nervous. I don't know if I want to go there, but yeah, you are correct. Einod Milvado is one of the foundational makairos for that idea. Something you think about. Einod Milvado. There's a beautiful nigun, Einod Milvado, and it's ma'ira a person, and one should realize Einod Milvado. I once heard from a Chabad Shaliach who was a Rav of in a difficult show with a difficult president. He says, when I'm sitting next to this difficult president and I think Einod Milvado, he doesn't really exist. He says, it makes my life a lot easier. He's not really here. He says, so that might be a way out when you have difficult roommates or whatever. Einod Milvado. So that's the way you can get through a difficult situation. Now, another story which is not directly connected to this, but it's about the Vilna Gaon in Galus, I just want to share. The Vilna Gaon mentioned that in Galus, the years of Galus, he met one man that he was truly jealous of. He says there was only one man in his life that he was jealous of. He says, the Vilna Gaon would come, he would wander from place to place. People didn't know he was the great Vilna Gaon. He was just a beggar. In Europe, of course, there were many beggars who literally would wander from place to place, just trying to collect a little money or a little bread. So the Vilna Gaon typically would go to the Beis Medrash, would learn. If he slept at all, he would sleep in the Beis Medrash. And he noticed there was a blind man, an old man who was blind, who would sit in the Beis Medrash and learn all day by heart, or would have somebody read to him. And the blind man heard the Gra learning, and he just called out. He says, who is this person, such the beautiful sound of Torah? I'd like to meet this person. So the Gra comes over, gives him Shalom Aleichem, doesn't say who he is or anything. So the man says, I'd like to invite you to come to my house for Shabbos. Come to my house for Shabbos. So the Vilna Gaon initially didn't want to take the invitation because there's actually a principle in halacha that you're not supposed to have a meal from a person who may not afford it, because that's almost a form of stealing. If I don't have enough food for my family, but I invite you, you find a diplomatic way to say no. That's called a seuda she'ena maspekes labayla, a meal that is not sufficient. So the Vilna Gaon wouldn't, you don't say that to the person. You don't say, you're too poor to have a guest, but you make an excuse. But the blind man anticipated and said to the Vilna Gaon, no. During the week I live very humbly, it's true, but on Shabbos I live like a king. I have everybody coming, so many guests, and it would be a great covet to have you. So the Vilna Gaon figured, okay, he says that he has. So he comes over to the man's house, and the man there are 25, 30 people having a Seudah Shabbos. What does the guy do? How does he get the food? So he says, I eat like a melech mamish. He says, my wife every day goes to the bakery. And when the bakery grinds grain for flour, there's a lot of flour dust on the floor. So she asks permission. Can she collect the flour dust? And she collects the flour dust every day. And she makes challahs from the flour dust that would just be swept out. And then she goes to the butcher's. And apparently, I'm not sure, there's parts of the chicken they just throw away. It's like garbage, And she gets that. And from there, we make this delicious, fricassee or delicious chicken. He says, and the man says with such simcha, I eat like a melech. I eat like a king. He says, Yad HaMelech. And I have orchim. I have 30 people. And the Vilna Gaon said it was true. These people are eating challah made from flour dust. And they're eating the parts of the chicken that were thrown into the garbage. But nobody's complaining. Everybody's happy. They're speaking Torah. They're singing Zemiros. The Vilna Gaon said, all of my life, I wish I could have a Shabbos on that particular madrega, the madrega of a person who was so Samayach b'chelka. I mean, what he was describing as ashiras was abject poverty. But he was still a person who had, many, many orchim. How much did they eat? Each person ate, half a mouthful. But the simcha was a simcha of ruchnius and kedusha. The Vilna Gaon said that was the one person that he was jealous of in his whole life. We don't even know who that person is. But such an anonymous tzaddik that existed in the world. So this is the first reason for Galus Hashchina, for Galus, and that is humility, humbleness, breaking your arrogance, knowing that you're totally dependent on Hashem, and that in turn makes you roy to connect to the Sechina. There is, however, another aspect to Galus, and that is Hashem is in Galus. The Sechina is in Galus. It says when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed and the Jewish people were exiled, Hashem no longer has his home. Hashem wanders with the Jewish people as we go through in Galus. So when you go into wandering, Kaviyachol, you are wandering with the Shekhinah. You are participating in God's suffering. You become close to him by doing what Kaviyachol he is doing and he is going through. So this is a different aspect. This is not only the notion of Galus as a mechanism of humility, but it's also Galus as a participation in the Galus of the Shekhinah. The Galus of the Shekhinah, it's called in Aramaic, Shechinta Galusa. Actually, I'll tell you an interesting voice from Rav Hershel Schachter. I think it's his own Chiddush. He says like this. He talks about the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. As you know, we talked about this. I'm not going to be marich right now. There is a big machlokas rishonim if living in Eretz Yisrael is a positive obligation from the Torah. The shita of the Ramban is that living in Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah saseh min HaTorah. There's a chiyuv to live in Eretz Yisrael, unless you have heterim. There are heterim, but without heterim, a Jew is chayiv to live in Eretz Yisrael, and the Ramban makes clear that's even when there's no Beis HaMikdash, it doesn't depend on the Beis HaMikdash, it doesn't depend on anything. Now the Rambam, well, all I can say about the Rambam is he doesn't count it as a mitzvah. Now there's a huge machlokas. What are the implications of the Rambam not counting it as a mitzvah? Most Meforshim learn that the Rambam doesn't count it as a mitzvah because the Rambam holds it's not a mitzvah. It's a good thing, etc., but it's not a chiyuv, and that's why it's not counted. That would be the pashas. That Ramban says there's a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Rambam says there's no mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, although he talks about the holiness of living here. Other achrayim and different mahalchim actually learned that even the Rambam is moda. It is a mitzvah, but for technical reasons, it doesn't make the list of 613, meaning there are a number of things that are mitzvahs, but there are certain criteria to be on the 613. So there's a machlokas. But Ramban certainly says there's a mitzvah. So Rav Hershel Schachter says the following. What is the yesod that when the Jewish people are in Galus, the Shekhinah follows us in Galus? So he says he wants to connect it to a halacha. There's the Mishnah in the second parak of Makos that said that if a Talmud of a yeshiva kills somebody b'shogeg and has to go to the miklat, his Rebbe must go with him. In fact, the whole yeshiva must go with him. Now, they can leave at night. In other words, he's stuck. He has to be there at night. They can leave. But during the day, the whole yeshiva moves to be with that Talmud. So can you imagine that? I'll give you a practical example. Hebron, strangely enough, happens to be or would have been a near miklat. Although today it's a murderous place. So theoretically, if God forbid, Bisman HaMikdash, when we have Ari Miklat again, if a Talmud of Or Samayach would kill somebody b'shogeg, Or Samayach would have to move to Hebron during the day. Right? Amazing thing. And the reason is because the Torah says the Rotseach b'shogeg goes to the Miklat to live. V'chai. What type of life do you have without your Rebbe, without your yeshiva? If he has to live, everybody got to go. Now again, they're not stuck there. They're free to, leave or whatever it is. But during regular CEDAR, they're there. So the Sechina goes in Galus with us, because just like when a Reitzeach goes in Galus, the Rebbe has to follow. So Hashem is the Rebbe that has to follow us to Galus. The Sechina is in Galus because we're in Galus. Talmud Shegala, Megalin, Rabbi, Iman. Right, you hear. So here's what Rav Shechter says. How long does a Reitzeach stay in Galus generally? So it's a strange sentence. When the Kohen Gadol dies, the Reitzeach goes free. Now, what if the Rotseach got used to the miklat? He actually likes it there. The Kohen Gadol dies, and the Rotseach says, I'd like to stay. Does the Rebbe have to stay in the miklat once the Rotseach has the freedom to leave? The answer is no. When the Rotseach has to be in the miklat, so the Rebbe has to be there. But when the Rotseach has the option of leaving, the Rebbe has no achrayas. So Rav Hershel Shechter wanted to say that if the reason Hashem is with us in Galus is because once we're in Galus, the Rebbe has to follow us. Once we have the opportunity to come back to Eretz Yisrael, and we decide we want to stay in Galus, he wants to say maybe the Shekhinah is not in Galus under those circumstances. Right? This was a point. In terms of the Mekubalim, though, I think they would disagree with him, although it's an interesting machshava. I think the Mekubalim look at the Shekhinah Begalusa not in the mechanical way that since we're in Galus, he's in Galus, but rather the loss of a Beis HaMikdash means Hashem does not have his home, and therefore it's the other way around. By my going into Galus, I'm identifying with the Galus HaShechina, and that creates a closeness because I am walking, so to speak, I am walking with God. I am walking with God through the Galus. They say about Rav Yeshua Leib Diskin, Maril Diskin, who had been the Rav of Brisk before the Beis HaLevi, and came to Yerushalayim, and he was a very big kanoi. I'd say his Rebbetzin was the big kanoi, but whatever it will be. But he was considered to be great, phenomenal gadol. They say that when the Beis HaLevi had to just write a letter to Rav Yeshua Leib Diskin, he would tremble in awe. Yeshua Leib Diskin lived in the old city, well, now we call it the old city, Yerushalayim, and he lived in a dump, a real decrepit shack. And when there was some proposal to make it a little better, because people were willing, they wanted to make it decent, he said, how can I live in a beautiful home if HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not have a home? The Beis HaMikdash was nechrav, and it was desecrated. It is desecrated by the mosques and everything else that's on there. So he said, Dayo le'eved, this is a lashon of Chazal, Dayo le'eved liyais karabai. It is sufficient for a servant to be no better than his master. So that's part of the second aspect of Galus HaShechina. One is the humility. The other is experiencing, so to speak, a Galus that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is experiencing. Yeah.
Regarding we have an option to live in Eretz Yisrael, does it say that if we live in Eretz Yisrael today, it's no longer Galus?
Well, Rav Schechter's word is presupposing that, and once again, if one does not accept that premise, then you're right. I think it's very clear. I mean, it's very, very clear that we are still in Galus. We're in Galus until Mashiach comes. We're in Galus until there's a Beis HaMikdash. Now, in fact, one might say that one can feel a stronger sense of Galus in Eretz Yisrael because you're so close to what we should have that we are not zoche to have yet. So it's not the end of Galus. Maybe it's it's not the beginning of Gula. Maybe it's towards the end of Galus, and B'ezras Hashem, maybe we're towards the end of Galus, but we're not out of it yet. After the 6-Day War, there were some serious proposals, not among Haredim, but among some religious people in Dati Leumi, about, number one, maybe abolishing Tisha B'Av, or at a minimum, if you're not going to abolish Tisha B'Av, change the prayer. The Nachem prayer in Tisha B'Av talks about the city of Yerushalayim being destroyed, being abused, being burnt. And Baruch Hashem, we have a built-up city. But as you would expect, the Gedolim were against any type of a change because they said spiritually we're still in a state of Galus. And of course, October 7 reminds us in a very vivid and tragic way that we are still in Galus. Okay, so these are the two aspects of the idea of going into Galus. So the interesting question is, just as a question, all right, so I read the Talmud Devorah, we try to follow some of the teachings. So what does that mean practically for me? What does that mean? Am I supposed to go into Galus? Am I supposed to kind of take a staff and wander from place to place? Like, what exactly does that mean? Now, in truth, Pirkei Avos uses the term when it talks about going to learn. It mentions have a gola l'makam Torah. Exile yourself to a makam Torah, meaning leave maybe the comforts of home to come here or to come and the like. But that's not quite exactly what the Talmud Devorah is talking about. He's talking about a galus that's more extreme. Of people don't know who you are, etc. It's not just moving far away to an unfamiliar environment. So it's hard to know. I don't think Lamaisa, any Rav would tell you to actually do this. But nevertheless, these are things that we think about, the humility lessons, meaning we can think about the spiritual meaning of this and try to apply it to our own lives. But the truth is, the Rambam himself in Hilchos Tshuva, when the Rambam talks about the things that give a person forgiveness, the Rambam mentions going into Galus. Look in Hilchos Tshuva, where he says that Galus is mechaper averos because it creates humility within a person. So something to think about. All right. So essentially, though, the idea of Galus I wouldn't necessarily define as a separate category. It's really a subcategory of humility as a means of bringing us to humility. Sorry, is that clock right? Oh, okay, sorry. Okay. I was wondering. Okay. All right. I ran out of stuff to say. Okay. So we'll stop here. Mr. Shem will continue tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to this Samayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.